Moses' last message, the legacy of Deuteronomy. Imagine being about to leave your people, knowing that you won't see the promised land you've been waiting for. This is the scene we find Moses in the book of Deuteronomy. He, over 120 years old, is about to say goodbye, and what does he do? He gives the people one of the most powerful messages ever recorded. The book of Deuteronomy is not just a simple summary of the laws given by God to the people of Israel. It is a profound message of love, obedience, and hope for a future in which God's presence will guide his people, even if Moses isn't there. But what makes Deuteronomy so special? Why, after so many years in the desert, did Moses choose to remember every detail of God's laws and covenant? It wasn't just to ensure that the people of Israel followed the instructions. It was a crucial reminder that without obedience to God's word, their lives would be empty, their efforts fruitless, and their fate uncertain. Throughout this video, we will delve into this incredible book, where Moses reviews, teaches, and warns, preparing the Israelites to enter the Promised Land. He reminds the people of the miracles and lessons that God has given them throughout their journey in the desert. However, he also warns them of the consequences of straying from the path. If you've ever wondered what Deuteronomy really means for us today, and how Moses' words can be applied to our modern lives, then this video will help you understand the eternal impact of its messages. Are you prepared to listen to the last sermon of a leader who led his people with unwavering faith? How can Moses' words resonate in our hearts, challenging us to live a life of obedience and faith? Section 1. Deuteronomy 1-4, a review of the journey and lessons from the past. Moses begins the book of Deuteronomy by recalling the long journey of the people of Israel through the desert. He is speaking to the new generation, the children of those who came out of Egypt, so that they know the details of the story and the challenges they faced. Chapters 1-4 highlight the importance of looking back, not as a way of living in the past, but to learn from it and move forward wisely. In Chapter 1, Moses recalls the crucial episode when God commanded the people to take possession of the Promised Land. However, because of fear and disbelief, they refused to enter the land of Canaan. Moses recalls how, after leaving Egypt, they arrived in the region of Mount Horeb, and it was there that God instructed them to advance and conquer the land he had promised their ancestors. However, the people hesitated, influenced by the negative reports of the spies, and this lack of faith resulted in 40 years of wandering in the desert. In Chapter 2, Moses details how, even with the people's disobedience, God never abandoned them. Even as they wandered in the desert, the Lord granted them victory over powerful enemies. He mentions crossing through the lands of other peoples, such as Esau and Moab, which were not given to the people of Israel. At that time, God gave them victory over Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, both powerful leaders. This showed the people that, with obedience, they could conquer any adversary, because God himself would fight for them. Chapter 3 continues with Moses describing Israel's conquests on the east side of the Jordan. He recounts the victories over Sihon and Og, which resulted in the possession of their land. Here, we see that obedience to God always brings rewards. Moses also recalls the moment when he asked God to let him enter the Promised Land. However, because of his previous mistake in disobeying God when he struck the rock at Meribah, God refused his request. Nevertheless, he allowed Moses to see the land from afar, from the top of Mount Pisgah. Chapter 4 is one of the most significant of this first section, because it is here that Moses emphasizes the importance of obeying God's laws. He warns the people not to forget what God has done for them and to obey his word, so that they can prosper in the land they will inherit. Moses also warns against idolatry, reminding them that God is a jealous God and that idol worship would bring destruction upon them. This first section of Deuteronomy is fundamental, because Moses is preparing the people for the future, reminding them that their strength and success depend exclusively on their obedience to God. The lessons of the past are a valuable tool for shaping the behavior of the new generation, so that they don't repeat the mistakes of their fathers. Deuteronomy 5-11, the commandments and faithfulness to God. In Chapter 5, Moses reintroduces the 10 Commandments to the people of Israel. He begins by reminding them of the covenant God made with their ancestors on Mount Horeb, where he gave them his laws directly. Moses points out that this covenant was not only made with their fathers, but also with that entire generation, emphasizing the importance of everyone knowing and obeying these laws. The 10 Commandments are presented again, beginning with the declaration that God is the only Lord and that there must be no other gods before him. The commandment to observe the Sabbath, to honor parents and not to kill, steal, or commit adultery are reaffirmed, laying the foundations for the moral conduct that God expects of his people. From chapter 6 onwards, Moses begins to deepen the importance of obedience. He presents the famous Shema Israel. Hear, Israel, the Lord our God is the only Lord. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Moses reminds the people that obedience must flow from genuine love for God. He urges the Israelites to teach these words to their children and to engrave these laws on their hearts. Faithfulness to God must be the foundation of their lives and of the nation they are about to build. In chapter 7, Moses talks about the separation that the people of Israel must have from the surrounding nations. God has chosen Israel as his special people, and they must not mix with or adopt the pagan customs of the nations they are about to conquer. Moses warns against intermarriage with these peoples, as this would lead the Israelites into idolatry. He reinforces that God's election of Israel was not because of their own merit, but because of God's love and faithfulness to the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Chapter 8 is a reminder. Moses reminds the Israelites of all the care God took of them throughout their journey in the desert, providing them with food and water, despite their constant complaints. He points out that the purpose of the trials was to teach the people that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Moses warns that, as they enter the promised land and begin to prosper, they must not forget that everything has been given by God, and that prosperity must not take them away from his word. In chapter 9, Moses recalls the rebellion of the people of Israel, especially the incident of the golden calf, when, on coming down from Mount Sinai, he found the people worshipping an idol they had made. He recalls how patient and merciful God was, not destroying the nation completely because of Moses' intercession. This serves as a lesson in humility for the new generation, showing that it is not by their righteousness that they will enter the promised land, but by God's grace and faithfulness to his promises. Chapters 10 and 11 end this section with Moses exhorting the people to circumcise their hearts, that is, to be genuine in their devotion to God, not just in external rituals, but in their love and obedience. He reiterates God's goodness and power, and how he sustained them, protecting them from powerful enemies throughout their journey. Moses emphasizes that Israel's future success depends on obedience to God, and that if the people turn away from his commandments, they will suffer grave consequences. The central message of these chapters is clear. The people must love and fear God, faithfully obeying his laws. Moses implores the people to learn from the past and follow the path of obedience, ensuring lasting blessings in the land they will inherit. Deuteronomy 12-18, Laws for Worship and Leadership in Israel. In chapters 12-14, Moses begins to detail the regulations for religious worship. He instructs the people on the importance of a centralized place to worship God. Upon entering the Promised Land, Israel was to completely destroy the pagan altars of the conquered nations. This would ensure that the worship of God was not corrupted by the idolatrous practices of these peoples. In chapter 12, God makes it clear that he will choose a specific place where his name will dwell, and only there should the people bring their sacrifices and offerings. This establishes an important principle. The worship of the Lord must be done in an orderly manner and according to his instructions. In chapter 13, Moses warns the people against false prophets and anyone who tries to lead them astray into idolatry. If a prophet or dreamer appeared and performed signs or wonders, but then asked the people to follow other gods, he should be rejected and killed, as he would be trying to lead them away from the true God. Moses also warns against people close to him, even family members, who might try to influence others to worship false gods. The severity of this instruction shows the zeal that God requires of his people in their obedience and purity of worship. Chapter 14 presents dietary laws and the importance of separating the pure from the impure. Moses instructed the people on which animals they could eat, distinguishing between clean and unclean animals. The aim of these laws was to maintain the holiness of the people in all areas of life, even with regard to food. In addition, the chapter highlights the practice of tithing. The people of Israel were to bring a tithe of the entire annual harvest to the place chosen by the Lord, recognizing that all blessings come from God. In chapters 15 to 16, Moses discusses laws relating to debt forgiveness and freeing slaves. Every 7 years, all debts were to be forgiven, and any Israelite who had sold himself into slavery was to be freed. Moses reminds the people that generosity is a mark of God's covenant with them. They have been freed from Egypt and should therefore treat others with mercy and kindness. In chapter 16, Moses also recalls the importance of the annual feasts, such as Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. These celebrations were a way of remembering God's goodness and His provision, as well as reinforcing the people's identity as a chosen nation. Chapter 17 deals with the importance of justice and the centralization of worship. Moses instructs the people not to offer faulty sacrifices and to severely punish anyone who strayed into idolatry. He also lays down principles for the functioning of justice in Israel, with judges and officials being responsible for applying the law fairly. If difficult issues arose, they were to be taken to the chief priest or judge, and their decision was to be upheld. Moses also introduced the concept of a monarchy in Israel, prophesying that one day the people would ask for a king. However, the king had to be chosen by God, and had to be someone who obeyed God's laws, without straying into wealth or the pleasures of power. In chapter 18, Moses talks about the priesthood and prophethood. He reaffirms that the Levites would not inherit land like the other tribes, because the Lord would be their inheritance. The people were to support the priests and Levites through offerings and tithes. In addition, Moses prophesied that God would raise up a prophet like him, to whom the people should listen. This prophecy is widely interpreted in the New Testament as referring to Jesus Christ, the supreme prophet who would come to lead God's people. This section focuses on how the people of Israel should organize their religious and social life in the Promised Land. Moses' detailed instructions serve to reinforce the need for strict obedience to God's law, ensuring that Israel will be a holy and prosperous nation. Propaganda. Quick pause. If you're finding this discussion valuable, you'll love our ebook, Faith and Finances, The Biblical Guide to Wealth. It dives deeper into the principles of faith and finance directly from the Bible, offering practical insights to help you thrive spiritually and financially. Grab your copy today by clicking the link in the description or in the first pinned comment, and start transforming your financial journey with biblical wisdom. Deuteronomy 19-26, Laws of Justice, Responsibility, and Blessings. In chapter 19, Moses begins by regulating the cities of refuge. These cities served as a shelter for those who unintentionally caused the death of another person. The aim was to protect the innocent from the avenger of blood, while ensuring that the cases were judged fairly. Moses reinforces that intentional homicide should be punishable by death, highlighting the importance of justice in maintaining order in the new land. In addition, the chapter discusses the principle of witnesses, emphasizing that no person could be convicted based on the testimony of just one person. This principle aims to guarantee a fair and impartial trial. Chapter 20 presents laws on war. Moses advises that when facing enemies in battle, the people of Israel should not fear, for the Lord would fight for them. There are also specific instructions on how to deal with enemy cities. Distant cities could be spared if they surrendered, but the cities of the Promised Land were to be totally destroyed, to avoid the corrupting influence of their idolatrous practices. This demonstrates God's desire to protect the spiritual purity of His people. In chapters 21 and 22, Moses brings several laws dealing with social responsibilities. Chapter 21 begins with a law on how to deal with a murder whose perpetrator has not been identified, showing God's concern for justice even in unresolved situations. Moses then instructed the people on the proper treatment of female prisoners of war, ensuring that they were treated with dignity. There is also guidance on the inheritance of the firstborn, especially in the case of a man with more than one wife. Moses discusses the rebelliousness of sons and how this should be dealt with. The law on the curse of the hanged man is mentioned, emphasizing that a person hanging from a tree should be buried on the same day, so that the earth would not be contaminated. Chapter 22 focuses on various social laws that cover everyday situations, such as the return of lost belongings, the care of animals, and mutual responsibilities between neighbors. One of the laws instructs that if someone sees a fallen brother's animal, they should not ignore it, but help to lift it up. This reflects the importance of a society based on compassion and mutual responsibility. There are also laws about the proper use of clothing and sexual purity practices, ensuring that the nation of Israel remains separate and holy. In chapter 23, Moses deals with purity in the congregation of Israel. He lists those who could not enter the Lord's assembly, including the Ammonites and Moabites, due to their hostile treatment of Israel in the past. The chapter also deals with hygiene in the military camp, where the soldiers were instructed to keep the place clean because the Lord was walking among them. Moses reinforces that the camp should be holy so that God would not turn away from his people. The laws continue with instructions on usury, vows, and the rights of workers. In chapters 24 and 25, Moses addresses social justice and the treatment of vulnerable individuals. Chapter 24 begins with instructions on divorce, allowing a man to give his wife a letter of divorce if necessary. Moses also instructs that the newly married man should be exempt from military service during the first year of marriage, so that he could take care of his wife. In addition, the chapter emphasizes the protection of the poor and needy, ordering the Israelites to be fair in their dealings and not to abuse the vulnerable, such as orphans, widows, and foreigners. Justice should be impartial and extended to all. In chapter 25, Moses deals with more social laws, such as corporal punishment for those guilty of minor crimes, but ensuring that the punishment was proportional to the offense. The chapter also introduces the law of levirate, where the brother of a deceased man should marry the widow to beget descendants, ensuring that the name of the deceased was not extinguished. Moses continues with the instruction to use fair weights and measures, as dishonest practices were an abomination in God's eyes. Finally, in chapter 26, Moses closes this section with instruction on first fruits and tithes. When the people entered the Promised Land and began to harvest the fruits of the land, they were to bring the first fruits to the Lord as an offering of gratitude, recognizing that the land and its blessings came from God. In addition, the tithe was to be brought every 3 years, and part of it was to be given to the Levites, foreigners, orphans, and widows. This act of generosity and gratitude would ensure that everyone in society was taken care of. This section of Deuteronomy emphasizes God's desire for justice, holiness, and social responsibility among his people. By obeying the laws Moses gave them, the Israelites would ensure God's blessing on their community life and their land. Deuteronomy 27-30. Blessings, curses, and the choice of life or death. In chapters 27 and 28, Moses instructs the people of Israel about a solemn ceremony that was to take place when they crossed the Jordan. On Mount Ebal, stones covered in lime would be erected with the law written on them, and an altar to the Lord would be built. There, peaceful sacrifices would be offered, symbolizing the nation's dedication to the covenant with God. Mount Gerizim, on the other hand, would be the place where blessings would be proclaimed over those who obeyed the law, while Mount Ebal would be the place where curses would be proclaimed over those who disobeyed. In chapter 27, Moses details the curses that would be spoken by those who broke specific laws. These curses include a series of secret or hidden sins, such as idolatry, dishonoring parents, violence against others, and sexual immorality. This underscores the seriousness of divine justice, even for sins that could go unnoticed by men. Chapter 28 brings one of the most significant passages in Deuteronomy, where Moses presents the blessings promised to Israel for their obedience to the law, followed by the curses that would come for disobedience. Moses abundantly describes the blessings of prosperity, abundant harvests, military victories, and peace, all on the condition that the people remained faithful to God. On the other hand, the list of curses is extensive and terrifying, involving disease, famine, defeat, exile, and suffering. Moses emphasizes that obedience would bring life and prosperity, while disobedience would lead to destruction and exile. Chapters 29 and 30 mark the beginning of the end of Moses' speech. In chapter 29, Moses calls on the people to renew their covenant with God. He reminds the Israelites of all the things God had done for them, from their deliverance from Egypt to their wanderings in the desert, and warns them not to turn away from idolatry. Moses emphasizes that the covenant is not only made with those present, but with all future generations. He warns of the dangers of abandoning the Lord and following other gods, and the consequences would be catastrophic for the nation, with avoidable exile and suffering. Finally, chapter 30 brings a message of hope and repentance. Moses prophesies that, after the punishments and exile, the people of Israel would repent and return to the Lord. When this happened, God would restore them and bring them back to their land. Moses reaffirms that the choice between life and death was before them. He implores the people to choose life by loving the Lord and obeying His voice, so that they can live long days in the Promised Land. This section of Deuteronomy presents a clear choice between life and death, blessing and curse. Moses' message is an urgent call to obedience, highlighting both God's justice and mercy. Deuteronomy 31-34. Moses' last message and his death. In chapters 31-34, the conclusion of Deuteronomy brings an emotionally and spiritually significant end to Moses' leadership and the journey of the people of Israel to the shores of the Promised Land. Moses, at the age of 120, knowing that his journey was coming to an end, prepares the people and his successor for the transition. In chapter 31, Moses announces to the people that he would not cross the Jordan with them, and that Joshua would be the leader who would lead them into the Promised Land. Moses encourages Joshua and the people to be courageous, reminding them that the Lord would go before them and give them victory over their enemies. Moses then wrote down the law and gave it to the Levites to keep with the Ark of the Covenant, ensuring that it was read to the people every 7 years, during the Feast of Tabernacles. The aim was that the law would always be remembered, and that future generations would be taught to fear the Lord and obey His commandments. God then warned Moses that, in the future, the people of Israel would turn away from Him, falling into idolatry and provoking His wrath. Therefore, the Lord instructs Moses to write a song that would serve as a testimony against the people when they went astray. Chapter 32 contains the Song of Moses, which is a powerful statement about God's greatness, His justice, and the consequences of Israel's rebellion. In the song, Moses celebrates God's faithfulness, but also laments the hardness of the people's hearts, predicting that, even with all the warnings, they would turn away from the Lord. The song serves as a poetic and prophetic way of reminding Israel of the covenant, and as a warning against unfaithfulness. Moses exhorts the people to take every word he spoke seriously, for their lives and the success of their nation would depend on their obedience to God's law. In chapters 33 and 34, Moses blesses the tribes of Israel individually. Each tribe receives a specific blessing, reflecting their role and identity within the nation of Israel. Moses' blessing is a way of reaffirming God's care and protection over each tribe, even after he has gone. He highlights God's faithfulness and His sovereignty, declaring that there is no one like the God of Israel, who protects and sustains His people. Chapter 34 recounts Moses' death. God takes him up to Mount Nebo, from where he can see the whole Promised Land, from Gilead to Dan, the territory of Judah, and the Negeb. Although Moses couldn't enter the land, God allowed him a glimpse of Israel's inheritance. Moses died there, in the presence of the Lord, and was buried in an unknown place. The Bible describes that, even at the age of 120, his eyesight had not weakened, and he was full of vigor until the end. The people of Israel mourned Moses' death for 30 days, and Joshua, filled with the spirit of wisdom, took over the leadership. Moses' death marks the end of an era, but his legacy and leadership continue to shape Israel's history. He is remembered as the greatest prophet, and never again has there been anyone like him, with whom God spoke face to face. The conclusion of Deuteronomy marks the end of one of the most remarkable journeys in biblical history. Throughout the 34 chapters, we see Moses not only as a leader and legislator, but as a faithful servant of God who bears the burden of leading the people of Israel to the Promised Land. Even without being able to enter it, Moses fulfills his mission by preparing the people for the new phase of their lives, led by Joshua. This final section is, in many ways, a moment of deep reflection on leadership, the fulfillment of divine promises, and the inevitable transition that everyone must face. Moses, in his last moments, not only reminds the people of Israel of the laws and the covenant they have with God, but also gives them the opportunity to firm up their commitment to the Lord. Throughout the book, it is clear that the main message revolves around the choice between obedience and disobedience. God makes it clear, through Moses, that obedience brings blessings, prosperity, security, and protection. On the other hand, disobedience, especially in the form of idolatry, would bring curses, exile, and destruction. God's justice is emphasized at every turn, but also His mercy and the possibility of repentance. One of the most touching aspects is the Song of Moses, which encapsulates the whole history of Israel up to that point. The song is not only a lament about Israel's future estrangement, but also a declaration of God's justice and goodness. It highlights the fact that, despite human unfaithfulness, God remains faithful and compassionate, ready to restore those who turn to Him. Moses' blessing of each tribe is a final act of grace, a way of ensuring that each part of the nation is remembered and that their spiritual heritage is recognized. Moses acts as a loving shepherd, caring for his flock until the very last moment. These blessings demonstrate the unity of the people of Israel under God, even though each tribe has its own unique characteristics and challenges. Moses' role as mediator between God and the people is once again reinforced, showing his concern for Israel's spiritual and material well-being. As Moses ascends Mount Nebo, he faces his final destination. Even without physically entering the Promised Land, he reaches the summit of his mission, to lead the people to the doorstep of the fulfillment of God's promise. His vision of the land in the distance symbolizes the fulfillment of God's promises, even if we are not always the direct beneficiaries. Moses teaches us that life is about fulfilling the role God has assigned us, even if we don't see the full fruits of that labor. Moses' death is a moment of transition, both for him and for the people of Israel. His legacy of leadership, wisdom, faith, and intercession is not forgotten. The Bible states that there has never been a prophet like Moses, with whom God spoke face to face. This recognition demonstrates the depth of his relationship with God and the importance of his role in the history of redemption. Although his death may seem like the end, it actually marks the beginning of a new phase for Israel. Moses' successor, Joshua, assumes leadership with a solid foundation and a clear vision. He was chosen and prepared by God, through Moses' guidance, to take the people to the next stage. The spirit of wisdom that rested on Joshua is a confirmation that God was with him, just as he was with Moses. This continuity of leadership ensures that the people of Israel continue to advance in their mission to possess the land promised to them. For the contemporary reader, Deuteronomy is not just a book of laws or ancient history, but a work rich in spiritual principles that still resonate today. The importance of following God's commandments, the need for repentance, and the call to faithfulness are timeless themes. In addition, Moses' life and legacy serve as a model of leadership, obedience, and unwavering faith. In short, the conclusion of Deuteronomy reminds us that obedience to God is the path to life, not just in physical terms, but spiritually. Moses teaches us that our journey with God may have its ups and downs, but it is perseverance in faith and obedience that determines our destiny. Just as the people of Israel were challenged to choose between life and death, we are also called to make decisions that impact our eternal lives. Moses' message echoes for us today: choose life, that you may live, you and your descendants, Deuteronomy 30 verse 19. With this conclusion, we can see that Deuteronomy is not only a historical account of Israel's preparation for the Promised Land, but also a spiritual manual for all those who seek to live according to God's will. It calls us to be faithful, courageous, and committed to the covenant God has made with us. Even when we face challenges or moments of transition, like Israel when it lost its leader, we can trust that God is still in control, guiding us on our spiritual journey. Now, with the book of Deuteronomy closed, the people of Israel are ready to enter the Promised Land under Joshua's leadership, with Moses' words echoing in their hearts: the choice between life and death. May we too, on our journey, always choose life, obedience, and fidelity to our Creator. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might benefit. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more discussions on how to live out your faith in today's world. Let's continue to grow together in truth and grace. Ebook, Faith and Finances, The Biblical Guide to Wealth. It dives deeper into the principles of faith and finance directly from the Bible, offering practical insights to help you thrive spiritually and financially. Grab your copy today by clicking the link in the description or in the first pinned comment, and start transforming your financial journey with biblical wisdom.